Today we're talking about the 13th Doctor in Commander. We're going to be exploring the best mechanics and the best cards for this deck, whether we're upgrading the Precon Paradox power or building it from scratch. For 1 green-blue, the 13th Doctor is a 2/2 legendary Time Lord Doctor. Paradox. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Team TARDIS. At the beginning of your end step, untap each creature you control with a counter on it. In addition, we get a Doctor's Companion, which is a neat new take on the partner mechanic. 7 different companions come in this precon, including Yasmin Khan, which it seems like Wizards is intending to use as the companion. Tap, exile the top card of your library. Until your next turn, you may play it. That works really well with the 13th Doctor's Paradox and Team TARDIS mechanics. That's really the key of making the most out of partner commanders. It's usually best to base the deck around one and having the other one as a support commander. With that in mind, Clara Oswald also works pretty well. If a triggered ability of a doctor you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. That'll double up the 13th Doctor's Paradox mechanic. Ryan Sinclair could work well too. Whenever Ryan attacks, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost, if it's a spell with mana value less than or equal to Ryan's power. And from outside of this precon, we also have Amy Pond, though she'll always be Amelia Pond to me. Whenever Amy Pond deals combat damage to a player, choose a suspend card you own and remove that many time counters from it. As we'll talk about soon, suspend is an awesome mechanic for this deck, and if we're focusing on suspend, then Amy's your girl. This video is focusing on green, blue, red for the color combination, because that's what the precon is. However, with 26 different Doctor's Companions to choose from, you can go with white or black instead of red, or just go straight green-blue. Now, before we get into the huge number of cards that I found that could work well with this deck, I want to talk about keywords. There are 9 different keywords that allow us to cast spells from places other than our hand. Flashback, Jumpstart, and Retrace all allow us to cast spells from our graveyard. Suspend, Cipher, Foretell, and Madness all cast from exile. Also adventure cards, if you've cast the adventure half first. And Cascade technically casts from exile too, from exiling cards off the top of your library. Also, there's a bunch of cards that literally allow you to cast the top card of your library. My favorites are Future Sight and Magus of the Future, both which allow you to play the top card of your library. This one includes lands, that's a nice bonus. And they don't restrict how many spells you can play or what types. Also Elven Chorus, you may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast creature spells off the top of your library. Creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. Why is this one good? It's because the 13th Doctor can untap your creatures when you get counters on them. So yeah, it triggers Paradox, but it also helps with the Team TARDIS mechanic. And Melek Izzet Paragon. You may cast instant and sorcery spells from the top of your library. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from the top of your library, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. This seems especially good if we pick Bill Potts as Doctor's Companion, who's already copying instant and sorceries. Now about that Paradox mechanic, remember it triggers whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, but this is not the first time we've seen that text on cards. We also have Mizzix Replica Rider, a 4/5 flyer. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you may pay 1 and a blue-red hybrid. If you do, copy that spell and you may choose new targets for the copy. If the copy is a permanent spell, it gains haste, and at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice this permanent. This one also seems especially good in a Bill Potts deck, although this looks really strong in this deck regardless. Keeper of Secrets says whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, Keeper of Secrets deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to target opponent. If you go outside of the precon's colors, Poxwalkers and Vega the Watcher also basically have Paradox. Then a few Paradox-like cards. These 3 trigger when you cast a spell from a graveyard, great for if you're building around Flashback or something like that. But personally, I'd rather build around casting from exile, which triggers these 4 cards. I want to highlight Kami of Celebration here. Whenever a modified creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Equipment, auras you control, and counters are modifications. Whenever you cast a spell from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Yeah, this does everything that we care about. It has a pseudo paradox ability. It cares about +1/+1 counters. It puts +1/+1 counters on things. It does impulsive draw, which you can cast things from exile with. I'm not going to say it's super overpowered, but it's highly synergistic with the 13th Doctor. Alright, now we're going to go over all of the synergistic options we have for the 3 basic things we need in a commander deck: ramp, draw, and removal. I'm going to show you just a ton of options, and I'll discuss the ones that I think are the best. Let's start with ramp. Remember, if we can get +1/+1 counters on our creatures, then we can untap them and kind of get second use out of mana dorks. This gives creature ramp a nice bonus in this deck. All of the usual options are fine in this deck, they would work well, but we have a surprising number of mana dorks that deal with counters. All of these are able to put counters on themselves, allowing you to get second use out of their mana abilities. Note that they don't have to be +1/+1 counters, so the -1/-1 counters on Devoted Druid Untapper, and so do the oil counters on Armored Scrap Gorger. Animar Soul of Elements can be really powerful too. Protection from white and black. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Animar. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each +1/+1 counter on it. Then we've got a couple mana dorks that put counters on other creatures, and a planeswalker that says each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has tap, add 1 mana of any color. -1, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Before we move on to the rocks and the ramp spells, we need to talk about mana sinks, because remember that the 13th Doctor untaps things at the beginning of your end step. If we've focused our ramp around creatures with +1/+1 counters to maximize mana, we need something to do with it on our opponent's turn. Obviously instants work, but we want some permanents in our deck with activated abilities that we can do on our opponent's turn. Ideally ones that are synergizing with what the deck is already trying to do, that is +1/+1 counters, tap abilities, and or triggering Paradox. Next we've got the mana rocks, and I didn't find much for mana rocks that synergize with the deck. Obviously we'd play Soul Ring and maybe Arcane Signet, the regular stuff. But we do have 3 that have Suspend, and remember Suspend casts from exile, so this triggers Paradox. On the whole, I don't usually like these cards very much. However, they might be good in this particular deck. Then we've got the instant and sorceries for a more spell slinger type of deck, as well as a few enchantments that might work well. And last, because I didn't know where else to put them on this list, Verna the Chaos Bloom. As you cascade, you may put a land card from among the exiled cards onto the battlefield tapped. In a cascade-focused build, this seems like a must-include. And Rashmi and Regavan. Whenever you cast your first spell during each of your turns, exile the top card of target opponent's library and create a treasure token. Then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with mana value less than the number of artifacts you control. If you don't cast it this way, you may cast it this turn. Okay, on to the card draw. I'm including here impulsive draw, looting, rummaging, anything related to that. Impulsive Draw is actually really good in this deck because it exiles the cards and you cast them from exile, so it triggers Paradox. And there are a lot of them now. Wizards has been doing Impulsive Draw more and more. Most of them do it off of your deck, but a few of them do it off of your opponent's deck. That's fine, and that's pretty fun, but it is less good off of your opponent's deck, because your opponent's deck's probably not going to synergize with your deck like your deck will. I know I'm throwing just a ton of cards at you, and you're probably going to have to pause the video or go back to read them all. A lot of videos like this just give a list of cards to take out and cards to put in, that's fine, but I wanted to go further than that. My goal with these deep dive build and upgrade videos is to show you all the options and let you decide how you want to build the deck. If you like or don't like this style of video, please let me know in the comments, either way. If we're doing a +1/+1 counter theme, Inspiring Call has always been an overperformer for me. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn at instant speed. Gaia's Will seems really good in this deck too. Suspend 4 for 1 green mana. Until end of turn you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard. If a land would be put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile that card instead. Waiting 4 turns is a lot. You don't want to draw this on like turn 8 or something. However, not only does Gaia's Will trigger Paradox, but the cards you cast with it also do. I should also mention that if you cascade into a suspend spell that doesn't have a regular mana cost, you do still cast it immediately, which is pretty cool. Twin Cali Hunter is one of my favorite options for this deck. It has an adventure called Retrieve Prey. Exile target creature card from your graveyard. Until end of next turn, you may cast that card. And as a creature, it's a 7/7 trampler. Once each turn, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a creature spell you cast from exile. Depending on how you build your deck, this could be really good. Unfortunately, it doesn't synergize with Cascade or Suspend or a lot of the other cards that would be really good in this deck. Just depends how you build it. In the wheels, looting, and rummaging section, I really like Faithless Salvaging. Discard a card, then draw a card, and it has Rebound, so it recasts at the beginning of your next upkeep. I would not normally pick this card over a lot of other options, but I love the idea of Rebound triggering all of our Paradox stuff. Creatures that tap to draw cards could be really strong here too. If you can get +1/+1 counters on them, you can untap them and tap them again to draw more cards on your opponent's turn. Alright, now on to removal, and before I highlight some of my favorites, check out the art on Illithid Harvester. That is pretty much an Ood, right? If the Ood had a king, then this would be it. Anyways, we've got a few options with Rebound. I've already told you how much I like Rebound. Unfortunately, none of these are spectacular, but if your Paradox plan plays out particularly pleasingly, then this could still be pretty good. I'm gonna be real honest with you here. I'm not super impressed by the options for synergistic removal cards. Cards that tap creatures, bounce creatures, deal small amounts of damage, destroy artifacts, stuff like that. It's good to have. You can have some of that in the deck. But I do recommend letting go of some of the synergy in this deck to pick format staples for removal. So I guess I'm not going to highlight much here, because while there's some good ones, nothing stands out to me as incredible must-haves. But for board wipes, it's a different story. Call Forth the Tempest is a one-sided board wipe. For a whopping 8 mana, it has Cascade, Cascade. Call Forth the Tempest deals damage to each creature your opponents control equal to the total mana value of other spells you've cast this turn. This is a little bit hit or miss. This is not the time you want those 0 mana suspend spells. But I imagine most decks are going to average, 5 or 6 damage with this, and that's pretty good, considering you're getting 2 free spells off it in addition. Spectral Deluge is another one-sided board wipe, a bouncing board wipe. Return each creature your opponents control with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands you control, and it has Foretell. When running cards like this, we really want our lands to have the island land type, obviously. We want our dual lands to be islands too. Next up, combat tricks, and I'm including a whole bunch of stuff in this. Protecting your creatures, buffing your creatures, at instant or sorcery speed, whatever. Distortion Strike really stands out to me here. Target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. And it has Rebound. You know how much I like Rebound. A couple oddball categories here. We've got extra turns and extra combat spells. I should probably stop talking about Rebound, but World at War looks really good. Then we have a surprising number of creatures that are clones that trigger Paradox or instant and sorceries that trigger Paradox, and some clones that put counters on themselves. If our deck has some really great non-legendary creatures to clone, having a couple of these in the deck might be really good. Speaking of creatures with +1/+1 counters, our next section deals with just that. The first few trigger Paradox, and the next few are just kind of generically good. Proliferate would be awesome in this deck too, and we have a lot of options for Proliferate now. I'm especially fond of Roleshk Apex Hybrid, a 4/5 flying trampler. When it enters the battlefield, put 2 +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control. When it dies, proliferate, then proliferate again. But Evolution Sage almost always overperforms for me. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. If we're going hard on +1/+1 counters, we also have a bunch of cards that put bonus +1/+1s on stuff. This last section is filled with cards that I think could be great for the deck, but I couldn't really categorize into any of the other sections. Kinda just generically good cards, mostly that trigger Paradox. Atali Primal Storm seems like a standout here. Whenever he attacks, exile the top card of each player's library, then you may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana cost. I've seen this guy get so much value in decks that don't even synergize with it at all. It would be even better here, and it's like 10 cents. It's ridiculously cheap. Rashmi Eternity's Crafter says, whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell's mana cost, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast the revealed card, put it into your hand. This is somewhere between Cascade and Card Draw. Either way, it's good. And I love that it doesn't only trigger off of spells you cast from hand like a lot of stuff like this does. And it doesn't have to be on your turn either. At this point, we have so many actual Cascade cards that we could make almost an entire Cascade deck. I've both played and played against Cascade decks, and boy are they annoying, but you could do it. Here's some of the good ones that I haven't previously mentioned in the video, and a big shout out to the ones that cascade more than once. Between researching for this video, recording, and editing, I've got about 30 hours into this video. And I'm not complaining, I do this for fun. But if you enjoyed it or found it helpful, it would mean a ton if you hit that like button. Because my channel is so small, every single like goes a long way in promoting the video in the YouTube algorithm. And if you really liked it, you can subscribe for more deep dives like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.